The Forgotten Minotaur King, Episode 40, the Epilogue. My name is Ahani Norj Omobinrin Rawu. I was a political studies and writing major at Sagwardi's University out of Wolfkeep Kingdom. When I read the letter my friend Kycell Bakshi wrote me, I never thought I'd be putting myself through an absolute nightmare for the next 6 months in pursuit of his historical research project, studying some unheard of Minotaur monarch. We were both in our early teens when the former disgraced advisor of King Pandolfo Wolfkeep, the frogman Ludopagus, returned and simply took the throne with an army of half-orcs from seemingly nowhere, whom bizarrely were all fairly young men and women, along with a few adventurer friends of his. Within a year, our entire society was uprooted. Most discourse regarding the new royal family was swiftly outlawed and harshly punished. Nearly all festivals and holidays were abandoned for once honoring King Pagos and his retinue. The barrios were established to segregate the poor from the common. And despite being the majority species in Wolfkeep, humans were no longer allowed in most positions of power, which disheartened my mother, who was a former high-ranking member of the kingdom's banking guild, leaving my father, a lowly paid dwarven crafter, to provide for us the next few years. Out of all the sweeping changes, the establishing of Sagwardi's University might be one of the few good things King Pagos allowed. However, despite offering many subjects and areas of study, he established a review board that harshly restricts anything potentially dissenting for what he deemed acceptable areas of study. My own field was one of the most oversought political and royal studies, something I only gained interest in response to the sweeping changes brought on by our king. As I neared graduation, I realized my opportunities were nearly non-existent. Any noteworthy royal or political figure often met with the king in private and typically gave in to whatever demands he requested, seemingly sight unseen. Not much need for a glorified stenographer, so when Kycell approached me with the writing opportunity, I took the job. When we geared up and headed to the barrios the following day to find some protection using the university's meager funds, I figured we'd end up with some lecturer's creep, a drunk or gambling debtor overestimating their skills. But meeting the mouseling Tristafe Myrink was incredibly serendipitous. She was so fascinating, very well armed, and seemed clever enough when she saved us from the half-orc captain that eventually hounded us all the way to Goldenrod. It wasn't until the following day we found out why he was seeking us at all. As I said, royal discourse and diplomacy had all but disappeared from Wolfkeep. That was until the recent engagement of King Pagos' first son, Dinge, to a rather young princess from the Rajalisad royal empire. Amongst the university staff, it was said negotiations lasted hours, even days. Kycell's Minotaur, we discovered far later in our journey, slew multiple members of the Rajalisad family. Word must have spread amongst the academics because within days of him putting this plan together, the prince and his betrothed showed up at our trolley station and began killing innocent people just to get at us, which seemed not to deter Kycell in the slightest. As we fled, that was when I propositioned him to expand the book's subject matter, outside of just the events in the Minotaur King's life. I wrote a passage on the history of our kingdom, much to Kycell's disinterest. But I eventually convinced him some information outside of our personal journey could deepen the explanation of events pertaining to our journey. He begrudgingly agreed, but only if I kept them scarce. When we exhaustingly arrived at the snug Spinneret Inn, Kycell went straight to sleep, but Myrink and I ended up meeting a group of adventurers that had also decided to spend the night. Dar, Valvorde, and Cuffs. We talked about their plans and how they met for a few minutes. I also caught a brief glimpse of the innkeeper's husband, Jemin, skulking around. I thought the creepy Ariadric was just eyeing Myrink and I up, but the following morning, when we all ended up wrapped in spiderweb and sold to Rospo gangsters, the inn's true intentions obviously became clear. When Cuffs was killed during the ride by Jemin and Valvorde by the gangsters when he tried to save Dar, I knew I needed to tell their story alongside our own. When we spent the next few months as indentured servants in the Rospo Schneef's narcotics mine, I got to know Myrink a bit more, and we also began a new friendship with Dar. I managed to get some gossip on the Rajalasad origins, starting from their humble Rakshasa catfolk days to becoming immortals that controlled a hefty portion of Indignia. Once again, I had to argue with Kycell to add this information once we left the mine and swamps, but he single-mindedly only had eyes for the Minotaur that was only recently deposed. Time went on. Dar was killed shortly before we entered the city of Guldinerod, and we met Mayor Kind. He finally divulged a hefty amount of information about the Minotaur King, Krunturg, and I must admit, it was far more grandiose and thrilling than I had expected, after so many months build-up from Kycell. I'm chagrined to say I had mildly expected our journey to end in disappointment. Kind told us about when he and King Krunturg escaped incarceration, how their war with the Rajalasa began, when Krunturg foiled their attempted coup for his throne, and so much more. The following day, he showed us his contingency plan to deal with the Rajalasad forces, now that they had returned to Guldinerod, and even began to tell Tristophe and I how he had traveled the world to find them, the Vigabane Skeletal Legion. But that was when the Pagas royal family and their half-orcs seemed to unintentionally catch up with us. I found myself with Myrink on guard duty in a skeleton-filled cave, discussing our plans for the future, while Kycell nearly got Mayor Kind killed by an assassin. The following weeks, we initiated Kycell's half-baked scheme to infiltrate the castle and rescue the mayor's kidnapped son and his babysitter, while we waited for Kind to recover. When he did, I managed to get the rest of his world travel story and decided to implement it into our novel, just in case he didn't make it. The days went on, and when I couldn't write, Kycell took over those duties, exclusively focusing on his own time in the castle, of course. Though I'm not too disheartened having the opportunity to forget my time doing manual labor for the castle. But it was only by my advising that we even addressed the huge political implications of King Ludop's son annexing this kingdom for both the Pagas and the Rajalasad families. If Kycell had had his way, this tome would be far more dry, and exclusively about the alphabetizing of books he did while wondering if Krunturg read some ancient cookbooks or not. I convinced Myrink to allow me to write a segment on her time in the castle, who she saw and what she did during the 2 or 3 days she didn't check in. This was when we learned of the kidnapped diplomat and the plan for his rescue. This was some of the last quality time I got to spend with anyone besides Kycell or the taciturn nurse Estelise, whose dorm we inhabited during our time as pseudo-spies. Then the Morongo Knights arrived, and the overly flirtatious Artois Valwyn drew us into their convoluted schemes to rescue the diplomat. Later, I was there as Myrink and Kind conspired to use them as a distraction, and the following events played out as they did. I wrote of the infiltration as best I could, privately interviewing Soiree, Myrink's sister, Perna, the mayor's son's babysitter, and the Morongo Knights that survived. With all that we'd seen and all the various kingdoms and nations scheming and backstabbing, Kycell Bakshi still only cared about where King Krunturg went next, even when our dear friend, Tristophe Myrink, the only reason he survived this long, was taken. He showed little regard for the desolation of the Mindus kingdom at the demand of our bizarre and powerful king. Our king, who I highly doubt will allow our book to ever actually be completed, let alone published for our home university. Not to mention the dubiously government-sanctioned or privately run Andrean knights operating in secret on royal lands outside of their own. Kycell was barely concerned about the drug mine slavery and the Rospo gangsters have operating out of this very port we're now returning to as I write. Or stopping the kidnapping racket those spiders Acantha and Gemin ran. Despite all of that, I'll continue to travel with him. We have to recover Myrink, for her sake above all. I'll even follow him to the depths of our world's most deadly places. I love to write, and this world has so much going on that we never would have conceived had we stayed in Wolf Keep. While Kycell seeks the past, I'll be by his side, along with Myrink, to tell the tales of the present and future. And someday, Maybe we'll become the research-worthy history for the next scholar.
Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell Bakshi along with all the additional voices in The Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. Or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.